Good afternoon, everyone.
Hey, Scott, how are you?
Not great. Nice to see you, Regina.
Good to see you too. So we'll be starting in a few minutes. The program is the same as last time. It's instead of Victoria, I'll be leading the EMEA sessions with CFA Study Switzerland.
Sounds great. Is this exclusively a European audience today?
Well, we might have some folks from the US join, probably the East Coast more than the West Coast.
Great, great. Where are you geographically?
I'm in New Mexico.
You're in New Mexico. I would not have guessed that.
I'm the not so new, not so Mexico version of things.
Now, I have to tell you, this is a strange place, this New Mexico place. It's like, I was in Albuquerque about a month ago giving a keynote, and it is like nowhere else in the nation. Yep. I feel like in America, every place is like someplace, Boston and Philly are kind of the same, and, yep. And Houston and Atlanta are kind of the same, but Denver and Salt Lake, but Albuquerque has no corollary. There's nothing like it.
Where were you giving the keynote in
Where
Albuquerque?
was I giving I was at a hotel downtown. I was some large mortgage conference I was the keynote for. And
nice.
Yeah. But where was I yesterday? Nashville yesterday. I forgot, actually.
Oh, wow.
And I'm headed to Las Vegas this weekend. And then where am I next? Indianapolis, Atlanta, and Pittsburgh next week after that. But today I'm in Salt Lake City. Looking forward to being here this weekend.
You're a road warrior for sure.
Mainly because most companies want to cram in their delayed team conference this summer before some variant explodes in the fall and they're shut down again, right? So corporate meetings are back to back for the next 4 or 5 months, seems like.
Yeah. We had ours just like a month ago too, which was delayed by years now.
Yeah.
I totally understand that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Sorry. Hi, Scott. It's good to see you. This is Sarah. Sorry, I have my camera off right now because I'm doing screen share. But I heard the story and about you going to Indianapolis. Actually, a huge part of my family is based in Indianapolis. Oh, I think you're on mute, Scott.
Truth be told, I'm actually speaking at Notre Dame in South Bend, but I thought no one might know what that is in Europe.
Of course we know.
Indianapolis.
Of course, that's like an hour from where I am.
Yeah.
Much closer to Chicago than it is Indianapolis.
You're exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah, and wonderful. Yeah. And Christine's actually based in Chicago as well. Christine is a co-founder of Collaborative WIM. She's a senior portfolio manager at Northern Trust Asset Management.
Oh, you are Christine.
Hi, yes, nice to meet you, Scott.
Nice to meet you. I lived in Winnetka for 6 years on the North Shore.
Oh,
amazing.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, we have quite a few people in my office on my team actually that live in Winnetka.
I'll bet.
Obviously, a lot of clients as well.
My wife lived in Glencoe. She was then this just lovely girl I saw at the gym, and we used to go to this gym together. And then she accepted my dinner invitation, and here we are 13 years later with 3 boys. We met at the gym in Winnetka.
I love that. 3 boys, adorable.
Well, that's debatable, but yes. We had 3 boys in 5 years. Do not do that. Do not have 3 boys the first 5 years of your marriage.
Wow, that's pretty great.
Yeah, we're very blessed, actually. We continue to be told how blessed we are, and You know, it can get pretty intense, right? Especially when they have my personality that she reminds me of frequently.
It's so funny that we have so many boy parents on this call because Ariel also has 2 boys.
Well, Ariel is smart when she stopped at 2 because the third one crushed us.
You know, that's what I've heard. And so when people ask me the same question, I say, you know what? I think the baby factory is closed. I think I've committed enough.
Sarah,
Yeah,
my
I don't
mom
know.
told me not to keep going. She's like, don't have a third.
Oh my gosh.
She had a
Don't tell
third.
my third that, but there is some truth to it. Just, you know, yes. Like moving from 2 to 3 was like moving from 2 to 5 in terms of just expense and energy and time and, you know, all of that. And we love this youngest one on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I'm kidding. Wednesdays too.
So, by the way, I should mention that we have a few guests joining here, including our very good friend, Anna and Zina from CFA Society Ukraine. So, hi, Anna, it's good to see you. I think you're on mute. But I certainly don't mind that we're all chatting openly here, but just hi.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Is it Anna? Is that right? Is that your name, Anna?
Yeah.
Anna,
Yeah.
I'm Scott. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Scott.
The world is
Yeah.
thinking of you and your family and friends and citizens every moment of every day. Every building in America is lit blue and yellow. Everyone is hopefully donating money and defense systems to help protect the right of your country. And you will survive this, and know that we pray for you and all of your family and citizens constantly in Utah, in Salt Lake City, Utah. Every building is lit up blue and yellow every evening. The world has your back.
Thank you so much. You could not believe, we do feel all the support from the whole world. I think this is, you know, the main factor that help us to resist this evil, I will tell in this way. So really, thank you so much for everything that each of you doing for Ukraine for now.
My oldest son, who is 12, every day when he gets in the car, we pick him up from school, he wants a debrief on, quote, is Ukraine winning? And we talk about it. He asks me every day, we talk about the reality, what's happening.
What's your answer?
I don't sugarcoat it. I say, you know, they're winning in terms of their spirit, but they're losing in terms of their lives and their families and their livelihoods. And we talk very raw about these people who've left their homes and their pictures and their medications and their pension checks and their Afghans and their photo albums and these people that are being slaughtered in the streets. We talk very openly about it. And it's an instructive lesson on evil.
Yeah.
And on humanity. I just, you know, not with the 7-year-old, the 8-year-old, but with the 12-year-old, we talk very openly about it. So I don't mean to hijack this phone call, but how do you not talk about this in your presence? So
thank you so much. I was trying to be muted and was turned off camera. So I'm sorry.
Can you share where you are geographically?
Yeah, actually, the first 14 days, like 2 weeks, we were near Kiev, near Bucha, under the occupation of Russian troops. On the 9th of March, we just like escaped from there, and now we are 80 kilometers from Lviv, so we're in the western part of Ukraine now.
Regina and Sarah, sorry I hijacked the call, but how do we not talk about this, right? And if
no, absolutely,
there's things we can do on this call to help you, put it in the chat pod. But you have our prayers, and as Americans, you have our cash and weapons and support to survive this, right? It's what we can do right now. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for that.
I'm glad you came. Hope we could add some value to your life today here on this call.
Oh, for sure. Because one of the reasons I'm just joining just to see all of you here.
And Anna, we're so glad that you made it. You know, we missed seeing you and seeing your smile. And so it's so reassuring to know that you're well. You're okay.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'm glad you could turn your camera on and be here with us. It's good to see you.
Yes. I don't know how long would it take because I could just drop off just because of unstable connections. Just
Oh, right.
yes.
How is
Oh,
the
yeah.
rest of your board doing? Have most people, were they able to move away from the?
Yeah. Yes. Actually, we are not just contacting our board, but actually we have contacted almost the half of our membership because we have just only 140 people. So we're just, it's not so difficult just to have a phone calls on the chats. So most of them, if not all of them, are on the safe side now. Not all of them are outside the country because most of them are men between 18 and 60 years old, so they could not move out of the country for the reason. Yes, but most of our membership and the board members are now in the western part of Ukraine, just waiting. I think like a week or a week and a half, it's more like calm in Kiev. So if they're without their families, because their families are out of the country, they're trying to go to Kiev just to, to live at least at their homes and like in their apartments and trying to do some job, to do some work. So more or less, we're all okay.
Well, that's great to hear.
It's riveting to hear you talk, right? Because all we see for the most part is, what the news shows, which is, I think, accurate and calamitous and horrifying. And it's somewhat reassuring to hear your confidence. It's, of course, not representative of the entire country right now, right, in terms of what's happening. But it's a moment of bright joy, or at least to see you on the camera in the midst of this carnage.
Yeah. I do understand your feelings as well, because after escaping from the Russian troops and moving to the western part of of Ukraine, in 2 days after that, I had a call with the society relations from the EMEA region. Kasha, she's sitting in London, and I was just smiling and telling everything I know, and she was just like surprised. Are you smiling? You are like looking as a normal, as everything is okay. Yes, but we are here feeling a little bit different, because we are like seeing different pictures. For example, I could not cry because I have a small child, like 5 years old. I could not do this. I need to be brave, to explain everything. Our president Alexei, he forced his family, his wife and 2 kids to go outside of the country to Slovakia. And he's alone now here. What we gonna do here? We're smiling. We're trying to live our lives,
Oh, you guys are fantastic. I mean, there's no words. Your strength is just, that's why you're gonna win, because you have it in yourself. It's incredible.
Well said, Laura.
Well, really.
Yeah, we certainly admire everything you guys do. So folks, I say we start. We got a few more people who have joined. Well, welcome everyone. I know there are a lot of you who have attended our quarterly book club. So my name is Regina. I am one of the co-founders and vice president of the collaborative WIM. So given a very intimate conversation we had just going, I would suggest that normally all of you know that we go into the breakout rooms, but having Scott here, I suggest we all stay in this room and bombard Scott with all of our questions that we have. So you can either raise a hand as we go through or put your question in the chat as we're moving in with this dialogue. But before we do that, I wanted to thank our generous host, CFA Society Switzerland. Thank you for all the work that you do in the D&I space and everything that you do to support the initiative. And we also have Laura here, so wanted to turn it over to her to say a few words on behalf of CFA Society Switzerland.
Yeah, thank you, Regina. Thank you, everyone. Hello. We are on behalf of the CFA Society Switzerland. I welcome everyone. We are very pleased to finally collaborate with our friends from the WIM. The Society Switzerland is actually with 3,300 members. It's one of the biggest one in continental Europe. Now, today it doesn't show much in terms of participation, but we are. And honestly, only unfortunately 15% of us are women, 15, which is a very low statistic. So in the career committee, and specifically me in the diversity, equity and inclusion subcommittee, we really strive to improve this statistic on one hand, and on the other one to serve a bit better our existing membership. Today we have, aside from myself, we have 3 other members of the career committee. We have the chair, Carol. We have a board member, Steve, which is actually the mastermind behind our mentorship program, which is quite successful and is running now for the third year. Yes, Steve, correct me if I'm wrong. And Martina from the CFA
fourth year, but that's okay.
Fourth, sorry, there you go.
No problem, no problem.
So it's actually a perfect topic for us. It's very dear to our heart. So thank you. We're very happy to participate with you guys.
Thank you, Laura. We appreciate all the support. So as always, encourage everyone to have your cameras on, but without further ado, really wanted to introduce here our keynote and the author of Master Mentors, Scott Miller. He's an Executive Vice President of Thought Leadership at personal development powerhouse Franklin Covey, where he spent the last 25 years of his career in various roles. Scott's professional roles evolved as he became a multi-selling book author, radio and podcast host, leadership coach, and today we are discussing his book Master Mentors, which became a #1 bestseller on Amazon even prior to its release in September of 2021. So Scott, thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for the invite. What a emotional opening listening to Anna inspire all of us in the safety of our homes and lives around the world. Anna, thank you for joining us. I'm emotional just listening to you and being in your presence, truly. In fact, today I'm actually in Salt Lake City on the set of the podcast that I host. This is actually a real set back here. So I tape this podcast every week. You can see kind of, what it looks like, but I'm here because I wrote this book as a result of now hosting what is the world's largest weekly leadership podcast. I'm going to guess some of you all know this guy, Ray Dalio. He wrote many books. In fact, I'm interviewing him tomorrow on the podcast. I just finished a prep call with him. It should be a great interview as well. So the books that I write are based on my favorite guests from the podcast, and volume 1 came out in September. Volume 2 is coming out in October, 30 new mentors, new insights. And now I'm writing volume 3, which Ray has agreed to appear in as well. So I'm on to the 3rd volume, on my way to 10 volumes in the whole series. So I'm going to be around for a while.
Well, that's great, Scott. So, okay. So you obviously are reading more than all of us combined, most likely here. But tell me, which one of the books is really kind of, speaking to you right now? Maybe not something that you're currently reading, but that you have read, but that you're actively employing and deploying in terms of mentorship strategies, in your personal or professional life.
I'm glad you asked that question. That's a new one to me. I read a book about 6 months ago from a man named Robin Sharma. And you may recognize him. He's the gentleman who wrote the book, The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. And then he went on to write a couple of other books, I think the 5 a.m. Club. And he recently wrote a book oddly titled The Hero Manifesto. The Hero Manifesto. It is the best book I've ever read in my life. And like you all, I've read thousands of them, read all these books back. These actually are real books that are nailed to this wall back here. The essence is just that, we should stop listening to our detractors, stop focusing on people who are jealous of us, of our success, of our wealth, of our vulnerability, that are jealous of our ambition or self-disruption. The book is a masterpiece. It's called The Everyday Hero Manifesto. Regina, can I share a 1-minute story from the book?
Absolutely.
So Robin Sharma, if you don't know who he is, and I didn't know who he was by name 6 months ago. I'd heard of the book, The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari, had not read it. And he's a pretty significant social media influencer. He actually, I think, was an attorney in London, a very successful attorney. And then he decided he hated that. And so he wrote this book called The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari as a whim. And it exploded and sold like 20 million copies. So he became an author and a speaker. And now he's an insanely influential, wealthy advisor around the world. But my favorite chapter in the book, so I say all that to say, this guy's legit, right? I mean, he's one of the biggest top 100 speakers in the world and a massive social media presence, a very public figure. Well, in this book, The Hero Manifesto, and by the way, he will be in Master Mentors Volume 3. I think he lives in Italy right now. He's, I think, Indian by ancestry, Canadian by citizenry, but he's a Canadian Indian, if that's the right terminology. His parents were, I think, native to India. He writes about 120 chapters in this book. Every chapter is like 3 pages long. They're kind of thoughts from this really wise guy. Like take Deepak Chopra with a law degree. That's kind of who he is, right? By the way, I interviewed Deepak Chopra 2 weeks ago. And as a side notion, there aren't two more dissimilar people than Scott Miller and Deepak Chopra, right? We have nothing in common. But Robin Sharma wrote a chapter in his book, and he called it, I think, The Day My Journals Went Missing. The Day My Journals Went Missing. This is a very famous public person that for decades had shared his most innermost secrets, thoughts, inhibitions, jealousies, traumas, and writing in dozens and dozens of journals. Someone stole them. Someone stole them from his home. So imagine if you were a famous celebrity and you'd written everything you never wanted anyone to know in your private journals and someone stole them from you. And then you wrote a book and one of the chapters was titled, The Day My Journals Went Missing. Now I would have said, son of a bitch, someone stole my journals, I'm gonna find you. But the point of this is, this guy is so deliberate with his emotions, his calibration, his regulation, the words he chooses. And the big insight of this story was, okay, now what? Now what do I do? Someone else has them and I don't, and I'll never get them back. And so what am I to learn from this? And so what if someone publishes them? Well, you're gonna learn a lot about me and my struggles. And so it's just fascinating to hear how he pivoted from what for him was a bit of a trauma. He doesn't call it that, but it was just a fascinating perspective on, okay, so now what? And I think the book is worth reading just for that chapter alone. I think it's called The Day My Journals Went Missing. It'd be like if, well, like I said, it'd be like if anybody had their innermost thoughts, they lived a public life and it all could be unveiled on Twitter or Instagram or WikiLeaks any moment, and you just were waiting the next 30 years to see if that happens, right? I don't know what he wrote about. I'm sure it's quite intimate, but I highly recommend that book, Regina, The Everyday Hero Manifesto.
All right, adding it to our.
You will text me, you will message me and say, I love this book, I promise you. Don't buy my books, buy Robin's books.
So you obviously, are very versed in the topics of mentorship, not just, reading other mentors, but you have your own work that you wrote on mentorship. And our hosts here at CFA Society Switzerland, they're also running a mentorship program. So really want to hear your thoughts on, what do you think makes for a good mentor or a good mentee? How are you being a good mentor and, checking yourself daily, or, any tips and tricks basically that you could share?
Certainly. In fact, I'm actually writing a new book for HarperCollins called The Ultimate Mentoring Guide. And I actually outline 15 roles that mentors play in terms of the questioner, the documenter, the closer, the inspirer. And so that book is coming out next year. Look for that. I think a couple of thoughts I think around mentoring. I think oftentimes we define mentoring as too restrictive. We think of a mentor as someone who is more senior than us, that's on the 4th floor or has a EVP in front of their name or some kind of credential. And in many cases, that's the way. That's right. But I don't think you have to be more successful, more educated, more seasoned, older than someone to be their mentor. But I don't think you have to even have met your mentor. Some of the biggest mentors I've had in my life do not know I'm even alive. Truly, I've never met them. I have designated them as a mentor to me. Maybe they're an author, maybe they're a keynote speaker, maybe they're a podcaster. And there's no question that you won't know who this man is, but in the 80s, there was a famous American radio host called Bruce Williams. And he was sort of like an entrepreneur and a small town mayor. And he was a radio host that had a 3-hour call-in program, you know, when to use an attorney, when to buy title insurance, how to handle 401k, how to incorporate. And he just gave good business advice. And I listened to his program, Nerd Alert, as a 12-year-old every night, Monday through Friday for 3 hours from 6 to 9 p.m. for like 8 years. And Bruce Williams has been the biggest mentor in my life. I've never met him. He passed a few years ago. He never knew I even existed. So my first answer is, don't minimize mentorship as needing to be a formal process. There's of course value with that, definitely in companies. But I would expand your notion of what it means to be a mentor, because I don't think you have to know your mentor to be mentored by them. Now, in the context of a formal environment, I think a couple of things. I think the biggest risk that mentors make is they try to turn their mentee into a miniature junior version of them. Well, I did it this way, so here's how you should do it. And well, here's what I would do. The problem, of course, is the mentee doesn't have the mentor's passion or strengths or skills or fears or capital or natural talents or access to connections. And so mentors have to be very careful to recognize your job is to help your mentee accomplish what it is they want to accomplish with their strengths and their weaknesses and their skills and their passions and their limiting paradigms. You have to be really thoughtful not to rush in and save the day, not to turn them into a miniature version of yourself. You have to constantly ask yourself, okay, so what should they do with all of their strengths and perhaps limitations, not what would I do? Now, on occasion, it might be okay to say, well, recognizing that we have entirely different paths and strengths and weaknesses, when I was faced with that decision, here are the questions I asked myself. Perhaps you should be asking yourself the same questions. I can't prescribe the answer because only you would know. So it's asking big, bold, open-ended questions and really resisting the natural proclivity to prescribe. I also think it's important to set boundaries as a mentor, because most mentees don't know to set the boundaries, right? Is you set very clear boundaries in a gracious way. I'm very willing to spend 7 sessions mentoring you for 30 minutes each. And here's what I need in return. I'm making this up. I need you to be punctual. I need you to be prepared. I need you to be focused. I need you to make sure that I have some boundaries. I'm not going to give you my network. Please don't ask me for funding. Please don't ask me to be your ally or champion per se. I'm here to mentor you. Now, the mentor can set very clear boundaries. And then once the mentee respects them and impresses you, you may choose to change them. You may choose 6 calls in to say, I like this young lady, or I like this gentleman. You know, who I think you should talk to is, I know someone who also owns a hair salon, and I think you ought to talk with them about whatever that is. So you can choose when to perhaps change the boundaries. But I think boundaries are very important to set early on, and then you can choose when to stretch them. So that's kind of a long answer to an important question. Those are some thoughts, I think.
No, thank you. This is really helpful. So wanted to now open up for questions to the rest of the folks in the group.
I'll follow up on this one on our program, Scott. So the biggest challenge we have is really the matching of mentee and mentors.
Yes.
And this is something that feels always forced, and most of the time, not most of the time, but there are really examples in which people just don't click. It's a question of human. So what do you do in this case? Because we are somehow responsible for the matching, but at the same time, you know, it's a human connection.
Yeah.
So would it be better to just let them mingle and find themselves, or what do you suggest?
I don't think there's one answer. I think there's a couple of answers, right? So kind of pick and choose what works for you. One is you're asking the right question because it is furry. It's not clean. It is, not always going to be the right match. So recognize you're going to have some mismatches. Don't get discouraged. Talk about it openly. In the beginning, say, hey, we're going to do our best to make the right match, but we won't get it right every time. And that's okay. If it's not the right match, take no offense. We might choose to separate you. It doesn't mean you hide from that person in the cafeteria. It doesn't mean that you have to should feel any shame. It's just, not last time I checked, most people don't marry the first person they date. It's a metaphor, but you get the point. So recognize it may not be the right match every time. If we do choose to separate you, don't spend time trying to figure out why, just go with it, okay? Second, I think you probably can't overthink this, meaning put a lot of time into it. I was once involved in a mentoring program where they had a young female business developer in her late 20s paired with a 60-year-old male that was the director of the travel division. So someone who was on a business development marketing track was paired, gender immaterial, but a male director of travel. It made absolutely no sense whatsoever. This director of travel was a savant when it came to which hotel room should you stay in Singapore and which driver will take you to the best restaurants, right? I mean, he knows nothing about career development and about organizational politics and about marketing automation or about the career of a 20-year-old, millennial. They were lovely and they accomplished nothing in 6 sessions, honestly, to speak of. So one is generally make sure that you're matching people that I think personality is less important and it's sort of trajectory is really understanding what is the mentee trying to accomplish. Are they trying to determine whether they need a graduate degree or they should leave or stay? That might be better paired with someone who's been on a similar path than perhaps someone who's got expertise somewhere else. So you want to ask the mentee, what are you hoping to get out of this mentoring relationship? Yeah. What does your path look like? What struggles are you facing? What are you confused about? What would you hope to get some clarity around? And then, a lot of them may say, gosh, I don't really know. Then you kind of have open season, but I would put some pressure in a good way. Yeah. And make it intense, not tense, on the mentee to help them understand, what are you hoping to get out of this? I also, to your point, Laura, is maybe there is a dating period. Maybe you say, you know what? We reserve the right to let you have 2 phone calls and then very, very courageously and diplomatically say, not the right fit. Either side, no harm, no foul, and everybody agrees not to talk about it or gossip about it or create, false innuendo. You break and you go and you look for a better fit. I don't think you should let people pick their own mentor because everybody will pick the one executive that has the best career or the CFO who's the woman. And now you've got 12 people that want to mentor her and she can't mentor 12 people. It's not possible. And she'll die. So I don't think you should let people self-select. I mean, maybe like medical school, maybe you could say, here are the mentors in our program. By the way, you'll almost always have more mentees than you will mentors typically. And so maybe like medical school, you pick your top 3 and we see if we can match you, right? That might be a way to do that as well too. I think recognizing that it isn't always going to be a great fit up front kind of gives you some breathing room when it does go sideways to say, hey, it's okay, it happens, not a problem. Mm-hmm. No one's at fault.
True.
Hey, Scott, this is Steve Rogers. Thanks so much for your time today and your valuable insights. It's really interesting to hear you and hear how passionate you are about this topic, and sounds like many topics.
Probably true.
No, we really appreciate it. So it's an interesting process, and just to give you a little bit more color, this is again for our CFA Society Switzerland program. We actually have an online application that everyone fills out, and then I call it matching in a petri dish. It's actually in Excel spreadsheets, and as a practical matter, that's just kind of the way that it works up until this point. And for the most part, it seems to work out okay. But I like the point about just kind of giving people that freedom to feel like, hey, if this doesn't work, because we are matching people just, again, on a spreadsheet, they haven't even met each other in most cases, to say, hey, is this going to work out? And maybe we'll have a little bit more of a, follow-up, just to be like, yeah, you got a 1 month trial period. Now's the time to, repair or get repaired, either within your mentor program or, within your mentor or with somebody else. But it's an interesting form of program that we have, just because most people, if they have a mentor, I guess you gave some great examples of people you never met in your life and they never knew that they were a mentor to you. But for a lot of people, I think it's people that they know and they came familiar with, and they got to really trust. And so one of our exercises will be kicking off as a sort of a trust building exercise to try to get to that. You have to sort of accelerate this trust period. But yeah, if you have any other thoughts along those lines of just even ways to sort of make people feel comfortable, first of all, but then encourage that trust relationship building, which we kind of have to accelerate.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One, preamble. So it just so happens that I have developed a career coaching program. It has nothing to do with this. I'm not pitching on this call, but I have this sort of online career coaching program where these 11 tenets of my career that I've learned, that I'm writing a book about, and I have this program. Well, I have about 25 organizations that have mentor programs, and they have adopted this career coaching program as sort of like their curriculum, because there was no curriculum. Because you get these high performing, executives or even senior leaders as mentors, and they don't really know what to do, right? They don't really know how to translate what they did into a coaching program or how to be a mentor. And so they kind of need a curriculum. So one of my responses, Steve, is you may want to have some level of curriculum that's loosely a framework, which I think is why my book's going to do so well, because my book prescribes 15 roles that mentors play, some simultaneously and some sequentially and some never, depending upon the relationship. So I think it's important to give your mentor a bit of a roadmap. Like, here's the road you're going down. You want to immediately identify, is this a mentoring call on how they can get to the C-suite? Is this a mentoring call on, should they, pivot out and become an entrepreneur? Is this a mentoring phone call because they're on a performance plan and they're hoping to save themselves? Because each situation is going to be different. Reminds me of, the great author, Clayton Christensen from the Harvard Business School was a good friend of mine, passed a year ago. He sort of is the iconic father of the whole circumstance-based marketing, right? What is the job to be done? I think one of the first things your mentor should do, simultaneous with building trust, and I'll get there in a moment, is really understanding what's the job to be done? Like, what does the mentee need me to do here? And it might be, to help them develop a multi-decade career plan. It might be to help them build their self-regulation. It might be to help them thrive in a culture where they're not a natural fit. It might be to help them disrupt their career and self-select out. But first, you should really identify, what is the goal? What's the job to be done of my role helping this mentee? Probably first and foremost. Secondly, I would say you need some kind of framework. Otherwise, you're going to have mentors just kind of floundering about, well, what should we talk about today? And they may decide to go off on a tangent. Well, you've got to get an MBA. Oh, you've got to get a PhD. I mean, like, what are you talking about? I'm not going to get a PhD, based on their own perspective. So I do think it's helpful to have some kind of framework, not a prescribed curriculum per se, but just to say, hey, here are some topics you might talk about in session 1. Here are some guiding topics in 2. Take them or leave them, but to give them some guides. I think it's why my career coaching guide has been used in so many mentor programs, because they came together and kind of didn't know what to do. Third, your point is absolutely true, is, how do you establish trust? Well, that's not done in one phone call, right? It's not done in a flyby. Because no doubt the mentee is going to have some preconceived notion of the mentor, right? They've seen her on a company town hall. They've seen him in the newsletter, whatever it is, and perhaps the mentor has done some research or some fact finding on the mentee, and it may not be right. Here's a great example in the privacy of this group. When we opened, I mentioned that I just had a conversation with Ray Dalio. Ray Dalio runs the largest hedge fund in the world. It's $20 billion. Runs the largest hedge fund in the world. And I've heard he's a bit of a jerk. I've heard firsthand that he's not a very nice guy. I've heard he's quite abrupt. And so people don't scare me. I'm a pretty ferocious person. But this morning, I was quite nervous about getting on the phone with Ray Dalio. He requested a pre-consult with me coming into his interview. I get on the phone. The guy could not have been nicer. Total gentleman, super gracious, great conversation, so complimentary, had done his research on me. I mean, could not have been any kinder. Now, listen, everybody can behave for 10 minutes, right? Including me. The point is, we all have these sort of preconceived notions around what our mentor might be like. So I think it's important, to your point, Steve, is to maybe have the first call, just to get to know you session, right? And understand how do you like to work and what are your joys and fears, and to establish some vulnerability. That's not done in one phone call, right? It's kind of a ground setting thing. But I'll tell you, if I was to say to a mentor, what's the biggest value you could add to your mentoring relationship? It's in the very first call, be extremely transparent and vulnerable, because you have a level of positional power that's automatically going to be intimidating, whether you know it or not. How you dress, your title, your education, your income, your vocabulary, your experiences, that comes with a level of intimidating power to the mentee. And as a result, they're going to choose their words very carefully. They're going to be very guarded. And you don't want that. You want transparency. So maybe you actually share some of your own setbacks. Maybe you talk about how your career hasn't been a straight trajectory, right? If there's been one step forward and two steps back, and talk about maybe some of the mistakes you've made along the way. That takes humility, that takes confidence. But I think it's so valuable to developing trust, is that, oh, okay, I can relate to her somehow. She isn't just this sort of untouchable professional that, I've admired from afar. I'll tell you, I mentioned this in the previous call with this group last week. If I want to go make $1 billion, I don't call up Ray Dalio. I go call up the people who lost $1 billion. I go call up the most people that have the biggest bankruptcies. If I want to learn how to have a 30-year marriage, I don't go talk to someone who's had a 30-year marriage. I go interview someone who's had 3 marriages. What happened? Because I can better learn from your mistakes and avoid them than I can replicate your successes. Because oftentimes your successes are unique to your own natural abilities. Yeah. And so I think it's important for mentors to not use the session as a confessional, but to be very vulnerable and say, hey, can I share you some of my own experiences? And let me share you some of the things that I've done wrong along the way. And that way it just sets a whole level of relatability. And I think in and of itself, that builds some trust. That doesn't mean that you confess all your sins in the first session, but your mentor should be self-aware of just how much power comes with the role of being the mentor versus the mentee. And you want to kind of take that down a notch, because the more vulnerable you are, the more vulnerable the mentee will feel they can be. And that's where the true trust, I think, and richness comes from, taking away some of those formalities that may not always be recognized by the mentor. Long answer, Steve. I think it's valuable.
That's very good. Thank you.
Yeah, those are really good points, Scott. I guess related to that, can you talk a little bit about peer mentorship and also the process, or kind of what that relationship looks like for a senior or mid-level professional to have a mentor? Is there a right cadence to that conversation? I think, a lot of times when you talk about, generally when people talk about mentorship, it's always the idea of, a very young mentee and a much more experienced mentor. But, how can we as mid and senior level professionals continue to kind of move forward, continue to have the benefit of other people's experience? And how do we develop those relationships, and what is kind of the right cadence for those communications?
Sarah, I think it's insightful when you say it's kind of a bit of a lost level of mentorship, right? I mean, it's not the commonality. You think 9 times out of 10, you've got a junior person on the rise who's fortunate enough to grab onto a person in the executive suite, and that's the way it is. And there's indisputable benefit from that. Do that many times in your career. And then there is the unnatural and invaluable peer-to-peer mentorship that requires perhaps an unnatural level of humility, as you can probably tell. I'm not naturally humble. I'm naturally confident. Sometimes too confident. But here's what I've learned. You know, humility flows out of confidence. To recognize I have confidence in this area, but I don't have to be the smartest person in the room. That I can very comfortably look at a peer who has perhaps, you know, relationship building skills that I don't have, or has an unnatural level of patience or focus, that has perhaps a really valuable level of regulating their emotions. And this is honestly, if you look at the destructions of most careers, it's not because people lacked the technical ability to do their job. They had the degree, they had the skills. They just verbally eviscerated someone. They were unable to manage their emotions, and they weren't able to self-regulate the way they responded to a situation. So lots of times, peer-to-peer coaching, go find someone who has a strength that you don't have, and talk about it openly. It takes a level of confidence and humility, Sarah, but I think probably a lot of people don't have. Just to say, hey, so what is it? What is my brand lacking? Maybe it's lacking business acumen. Maybe I honestly don't know how to read a P&L. You'd be surprised at how many very competent business leaders never had a business class. They don't have a business degree. I didn't have a business degree. I had an undergraduate communications degree. But yet I became a named executive officer in a public company. Up to your horror, I was probably 32 before I knew how to calculate EBITDA, or even what the hell EBITDA was. And so I think it's important for peers to be able to exercise the self-awareness to recognize what part of my portfolio needs to be augmented. And I'll tell you, it's oftentimes on the interpersonal side. And then go out and have the courage and the humility and the vulnerability to go ask someone, hey, you've got something that I'm trying to build, and let me name it for you. I see you in meetings, not always raising your hand first. I see you in meetings taking, copious notes. I see you choosing your words I admire these things in you. I'm actually not very good at that. Would you be willing to mentor me on that? I think that's a competitive advantage to be able to articulate what is it you need to learn, identify it perhaps in a peer, and go name it with them. You do these things that I'd like to learn. Could you mentor me? And that way the person might say, wow, they've watched me. And I'll bet you that person doesn't even know they do them well. They don't even know they do them well. But it takes a level of vulnerability that I think is a leadership competency. And I'm allowed to say that because I'm a leadership author and I've been in the leadership business for 30 years. Just like lots of other competencies, vulnerability is both a mentee and a mentor and a leadership competency. I can think of many people on the executive team that were my peers. In some cases, maybe even my junior in terms of, contribution, that had personality traits that could be replicated in my brand, that I would talk to them about, tell me why you do that and how did you learn that? And it might have been more natural to them than it was natural to me, but I was able to integrate it into my skill set through them mentoring me, probably more informally. I didn't ask them, would you mentor me? It was more of a, hey, could we go to lunch a couple of times over the next few months, and could I learn from you how you developed this skill? And usually it took me pulling it out of them because of their humility or their not thinking it was a skill. And no, that's a skill that I don't have. It took me kind of pulling it out of them, and I learned a tremendous amount. I hope I addressed your question.
Scott, on this topic, I'm curious if you've seen success with kind of group mentoring sessions as opposed to just kind of these one-on-one mentor-mentee relationships, just kind of given maybe a lack of supply of mentors and a lot of people wanting to be mentored. Just curious if you have any advice on how to make that most effective. Yeah,
I have one piece of advice. And that is, usually you'll have a reluctant mentor. Like, here's a good example. Like, there's a woman in this company, her name is Colleen. She's the COO, the Chief Operations Officer, not the COO like operating, Chief Operations Officer. So supply chain, inventory, customer service, right? I mean, she's the backbone of the company, right? And Colleen is one of those colleagues you love to hate because she's insanely competent. She has maturity that is unidentifiable to me. She's reasonable, she's kind, she's smart, she's educated, she's patient, she's the whole damn package. And so if you were to tell Colleen that, she would deny the whole thing. She'd be like, oh, shucks, and it would be sincere. So what you don't want to do is you don't want to identify a competence in someone and then have them mentor a group and it be sort of like an aw shucks moment. Because that's, even though it could be genuine humility, it won't be helpful. You've got to recognize, you've got to help Colleen recognize, Colleen, you do this thing really well. And I need for you to own that. And I need you to think about it and teach everybody else how you came to learn that. Because if Colleen gets on a call and says, well, I'm not quite sure why I'm even on here because, I've been told this isn't helpful, right? This is not helpful to people. I think Colleen has to say, depending upon that person's personality, it might be the opposite. They might say, well, dang right I do this. I'm the best in the world. Well, that's not helpful either, right? But I think there's a sweet spot to get people together to say, today, we're going to talk about the power of verbal restraint, knowing when to speak up and knowing when to be quiet, knowing when to play big and when to play small, knowing when to be the first answer and when to be the fourth answer, and knowing when to just be quiet and listen to everybody else's answer and decide whether or not you should even weigh in. And today we've invited Colleen Dom to share us the 4 questions she asks herself. You get the point, right? But make sure that Colleen is prepared and doesn't come to the table with false humility. Is that helpful?
It is, yeah, and just kind of clear objectives and understanding why the mentor is there.
I think recognizing competencies that everybody could learn from and picking somebody in the company that embodies those, offline, even role-playing the conversation to make sure that there's some actionable things. Because, Colleen may just have, Colleen may have been raised by Quakers and their house was calm. And I was not raised by Quakers and my house wasn't calm. So you got to make sure that these are skills that she could transfer to people. Think about this before you say that.
That's great.
Colleen might say, many people are outward processors, meaning they have to say out loud what it is they're thinking before they know if they believe that. Well, if you are an outward processor, here are some ways to make sure that's done in a safe environment and not become the person who's just prattling on. You might want to role play to make sure that it comes out. But I think it's a great idea. I love the idea of having a mentor series with maybe a different mentor each month and identify a strength that they have that they could then teach in a way that other people could choose to adopt. It's a great idea.
I'm curious what you mentioned. You said that it's good to have this relationship when you discover what is someone's maybe weakness, what is missing in the soft skills. And what I think this is very challenging, like what we notice in society as well, that we organize maybe the soft skills trainings, but we also have an offer in professional learning, like how to build the models, how to understand crypto, how to invest in startups. And we see that this more technical topics, they have 1,000 people are coming to the webinar. And as soon as we start to say, okay, let's have the soft training and train your soft skills, identify the skills which you need. And then people are not interested in coming. And we get really great speakers as well. And now we have already for a few years this mentoring program. And I believe also maybe some and which is also very well attended, but it's based you are connected with someone who is in your city. So my understanding, probably this person is willing to expand the network, to support the career development through this network. But how to bring this relationship to the level you mentioned, that we support actually these soft skills, that we, you need a confidence, you need a trust, which Steve mentioned, to believe that I can share with you what I believe it's lacking in my character,
Martina, beautifully said. I think it's true. I think that you have to have a couple of things in place. One is you have to remind your mentors, one-on-one group, that their biggest value is going to be vulnerability and sharing the mistakes they made, not as a confessional, not as an open kimono on every issue, but to be able to teach through your challenges. I also think it's interesting and counterintuitive that the top reasons people get fired isn't from a lack of technological knowledge. It's their interpersonal skills. It's what is it like to be in a meeting with you? What is it like to work with you in a project? What's it like to work a trade show booth with you? What's it like to be around you? That's why people get terminated, because of their interpersonal skills. So maybe some of your topics are join XYZ as she shares the reason she was fired from her first job. Talk to, join us as he shares the biggest career mistake he ever made and why he was passed over for the job that he always wanted in his life. I mean, make these topics provocative and then make sure the person that comes tells the truth and gets kind of dirty, so to speak, and that sounds strange, that gets, vulnerable and is transparent. And then I think the best way to get people to come to these events is through word of mouth, right? Is say, you don't want to miss this. And then when someone comes, have them talk to their network to say, oh my gosh, that was great. You've got to come back to this. Every culture is different in terms of how people choose to show up. But, if someone in our company had a webcast that said, why they stayed in their role 3 years too long, that's an interesting topic, right? Or, how I have learned to safely disrupt myself before I am disrupted by someone else. That's a cool topic to come to as well. I think a lot of it is just making sure you're speaking the language that makes it safe for people to show up. Because, if you had a webinar that said, how to manage my anger and emotions, I'm not showing up for that, because that makes me admit that I got an anger management issue, right? So I got to make sure that I feel safe showing up to the topic, right? You might even rename it something like, the one skill everyone needs to make it to the pinnacle of their career, but most of us don't learn soon enough. Something like that, right? That there's just, just make sure that you name these things also in a way that makes it safe for people to show up. Hopefully I answered your question, Martina. You had a well-articulated, multifaceted question. And I think, I tell you, one of the modules that I have in my career coaching course called Ignite Your Genius is the top 5 reasons people get fired. It's like the most watched course on the program, and top 5 reasons people get hired. It's the second most, other ones are well attended, but people want the juicy stuff, but it's safe to watch it because it's, in their own home and I don't keep track of who watches it or who downloads it and all that kind of stuff. But it's important to call it out, is to say, honestly, the number one reason people lose their jobs is because of interpersonal fit. They just cannot assimilate well into the culture, and they don't know how to get things done in a way today that allows them to get things done in a way next week. Because anybody can get things done today by just steamrolling over people and having bodies, but it's a way that you accomplish work today in a way that builds trust, where you can get it done a month from now as well too. And these are important skills. So I think how you position it is everything as well. And I'd love to come to your crypto course, by the way.
You mentioned, when Steve asked you the previous question, you mentioned that it's good to have a roadmap for mentor and mentee.
Yeah.
And that you like to give them maybe some topics. What should you discuss during the first meeting? What is the discussion for the second, third?
Yes.
Could you give us some ideas?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I'm actually going to pull it from my course, because I actually think this is why the course is being used so often. The very first question I ask is, what are your values? What do you value? And this is not an uncommon question. The problem is, Martina, most people do work on their personal values. Their personal values. Like, I know what my personal values are. There's 7 of them. PhilPal, PHILPAL. Positivity, health, integrity, loyalty, purpose, abundance, and learning. Those are my 7 personal values. I have them committed to memory, and I make all my life decisions based on those. But most people stop right there. In fact, most people can't tell you what their personal values are. If you were to ask me, they'd say equity, freedom, diversity, joy. What? That's great. That's a dictionary. No. Take some time to really think through, what are your personal values? My number 1 value is purpose. I think my purpose is to be a dad to 3 sons. I don't like it. I don't enjoy it. And most days I regret it, but it is my calling now. And so I make all my decisions through that number 1 value of purpose. Here's the problem, Martina. I think to the extent anyone has ever identified their personal values, they've never identified their professional values, and they are different. My professional values, number 1 is to maximize my income. My number 2 professional value is to work for a brand that I like and respect. My number 3 value is to work with people that I love and who love me. So my number 1 value is unabashedly to maximize my personal income. But not so much that I want to go work in a hedge fund, because I have no idea what a hedge fund even does. So my second value helps me to, you get the point, right? I'm not willing to go sell cocaine because I can earn a lot more money selling cocaine, but I'm not willing to get rid of all my rest of my values because of my first one. The reason it's important is because now I know when are they in conflict, because my second personal value is health. So I can't go sell cocaine because that's good. You get the point. If you haven't done work on both your personal and professional values, then you're just chasing your tail. You have no idea what it is you value in your job, in your career, in leadership, in culture. So I think it's the first question is to help people really understand what are your values, because when you become faced with a decision like, oh, I don't know, the great resignation, and someone offers you 40% more to switch industries, my gosh, you know, for 100 grand more, I might take that job. But it might be with a company that has values that are completely incongruent with what you want to do with your life and your brand and your reputation. That's why so many people just bounce around aimlessly, accidentally. I mean, the second thing I ask is, what's your multi-decade plan? Multi-decade plan? Yeah, multi-decade plan. Don't just think, what is your next job? What is the ultimate? What is the penultimate? Like, what do you hope to be doing when you're 60? I don't know, I'm 25. Let's talk about it. I mean, do you want to be the CFO, the CEO? Do you want to be an entrepreneur? You want to be retired? Do you want to be a coach, a consultant, an independent contractor? Do you want to be running Asia? Do you want to be working, you know, what is it you want to do? And I think it's so important to have the mentor be helping the mentee think longer term, generationally. Oh, I see. So you want to be the CEO of your own company. What kind of company? What kind of industry? So let's talk about that. If you're going to be the CEO, you probably ought to be the COO somewhere. Maybe even you probably ought to have some international experience. Maybe you ought to have some supply chain experience, and you probably ought to have some sales experience and some marketing experience. And you have to have led people. You have to have some P&L. You get the point, right? Is to help people think about what's their long-term plan. Some other questions are really understanding, what is your brand? What is your brand? And then should you not validate that with other people by asking them, what is my brand? Because I think my brand might be X, Y, and Z, but if I ask Laura, Laura might say, no, it's like A, B, and C. And you might say, well, I don't want that to be my brand, so how should I change it? So I have a whole exercise around understanding, what is your brand? What do you want it to be? How self-aware are you? And questions like that. I think those are really valuable ways. I think the most important question a mentor can ask is, what is it you want to do? What is it you're trying to accomplish? And then the mentor can help to decide, once the mentee has determined that, how can I help you do that? Not how would I do that? How can my wisdom, my experience, my mistakes, my successes, how could my journey help you accomplish that on your journey? That's the first question you ask. What is it you're trying to accomplish? And I'll bet you most mentees don't know, and that's just okay. Let's talk about it. Because the mentee might say, you know what? I'm trying to pass the bar. Okay. I'm trying to, you know, get into grad school. All right. I'm trying to get promoted out from under Jessica because I hate her. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, not far-fetched, people. My boss is a jerk and he won't give me recommendations, so I'm trying to figure out how to pivot out of his division into a different division. I could go on for many more questions, but I mean, those are the types of things that I think a great mentor does. The number one risk a mentor faces, and everybody falls into it, I faced a similar challenge and here's what I did. That's not always helpful because the likelihood the situation is the same is rare. Instead of that, say, so let's ask you some questions. So if you were to do this, what would happen? If you were to say that, what would happen? If you were to think of a different path, what would that look like? And just ask smart, open-ended questions. Maybe not all the time, because you can fatigue someone with questions, right? But to make sure your mentor has what are some back pocket questions. Maybe as the program leader, you could write out 50 back pocket questions, right? So what if you were to put that on hold and try something else first? What might that look like? Or what next step could you take that would better build confidence in yourself and in your leader that could prove to you both you're ready to do this? Whatever it is, maybe you germinate 50 back pocket questions that your mentor could have to use in any particular situation. I think that's kind of the main job of a mentor, is just to help the mentee identify what is it they're trying to accomplish and what kinds of insights could you unfold in them that help them understand how to accomplish their journey. I talked a lot there.
It's great. We had also driving on that discussion, how to facilitate. You mentioned already the roadmap, which we also discussed this concept. But the other question was like, who should be more driving this relationship? And then our answers are very depending on the age. So like me as a maybe younger person, I think like I would like to have a mentor who will be the driver of this relationship and will giving me the knowledge, and I don't have to come and ask him. But then like maybe someone else from the community was like, who is at senior level and has different perspective, and it's a mentor already, say like, no, the mentee should show the initiative and interest, and then then someone else can be a mentor to this person.
I agree with none of that and all of that, because it's completely situational. And I think the mentor needs to be emotionally agile enough to decide what's the right path in the circumstance. I don't think it's an age question. I think it's a clarity question, because you might have a young mentor who's 24 that has no idea how this even works. They're competent, they're courageous, maybe they're not, maybe they're competent, but they're more retiring and shy and they're more naturally introverted. So I don't think there's one right answer. I think the right answer is more mentor. You have to bring to the table a level of emotional agility to know what is the right tension, what is the right role to play. You might come out of the gate playing a little more forceful, and then you take your foot off of the gas and let the mentee come up. You might actually have a mentee who's outrageously confident, but misdirected. And so you take a step back for a moment, and then you realize this person is sort of unconsciously incompetent. And then maybe after a couple of sessions, you come in a little more heavy-handed. Does that make sense? I don't think it has to do with necessarily the age or the gender or any of that. I think it's all situational, and your role might change based on your emotional agility to read the situation and recognize what role should I play differently on each coaching call or each situation. As a mentor, I might misjudge the person coming out of the gate and think this person doesn't know what they're doing, when in fact, this person might be recovering from some trauma in their life, and they need some time to understand what is my style, what is my speed, how fast do I process, and they need to build some trust with me. It's very common the case. You might have someone that is of a different gender that's had a horrible experience with men in power, or you might, or some other situation. That's why I think it's to remind the mentor that they've got to bring a level of emotional maturity, of emotional agility to their mentoring situation to calibrate their role right for the mentee. And it might change, over time. It likely will change over time. As the mentee becomes more clear and more confident and more competent, you might pull back a little bit. Because there's no question, I think, the coming out of the gate, in that first encounter, I think it's the job of the mentor to make the mentee comfortable, to bring out their confidence or to bring out their insecurities, to make it safe to tell the truth, make it safe to be yourself. Remind the mentor they are likely going to underestimate their power and their stature, and they've got to bring that kind of down to a level to where the mentee feels comfortable saying, you know what, quite frankly, I'm not quite sure what to expect on this. It's my first time. I don't know if I can ask you these questions or these questions. And the mentor needs to make it safe to say, you know what, you can ask me all those questions. I'm looking forward to this. Here's some things I need from you. I need you to be on time and prepared. I need you to make promises and keep them. If you make commitments to me, you must keep them. I'll do the same to you. And first, why don't we start with, why don't we both share what our journeys have been so we get to know each other a little bit. Let's both share a couple of fears. Let's share some fears and some passions and some goals we have. Let's see if we can kind of get to the root of what it is you'd like to accomplish. And if you don't know, that's okay, Regina. It might take us a couple of calls to uncover that, and that's just fine. I think that kind of dynamic makes the mentee think, whew, this is going to be good. I'm going to enjoy this. But not every mentor has that emotional agility to play multiple instruments, so to speak. Does that make sense? I think it's important you remind the mentor of how important, how vital their emotional maturity is to this.
I promise this last question, but you said they should be on time and prepared.
Yes.
What do you believe, like what kind of preparation? So you finish the meeting, like let's imagine you finish the meeting, you give some tasks, some ideas to brainstorm so this person can, like, what kind of preparation you mean?
Yeah. Again, I think it's situational, and that's not my convenient answer. You know, I have an unnatural level of, I have a high level of courage. So it's likely that even in my 20s, I probably would have taken over the mentoring call if I was the mentee. I would have made and kept my own promises. I would have been 10 minutes early. You know, that's just who I am, for good and for bad. I think it's important that in the relationship, the mentor relationship, that they talk about what are the rules of order, right? What are the rules? And the rules are that we're going to both be on time. And we define what on time means, because someone might think on time is 2 minutes early. Some might think on time is I'm dialing in, but I'm off camera until my car gets parked. I mean, I think you should just talk about it, right? As you know, one of my favorite quotes of all time, Martina, is that nearly all, if not all, conflict in life comes from mismatched or unfulfilled expectations. I'm going to repeat it. Nearly all, if not all, conflict in life comes from mismatched or unfulfilled expectations. So I think it's important for the mentor to clarify what the expectations are up front. So there's very little conflict. When we say on time, we mean that we'll both be seated on camera in a quiet room, distractions off, ready to go, prepared to deliver on any commitments either of us made from the previous call. Can you agree to that? Great. Is there any confusion on that? No. Why don't we just repeat it just so that, you know, there's no conflict, because I'm going to be frustrated if you're 4 minutes late and you're off camera. I'm just telling you that's going to frustrate me. And just be clear up front, right? Just to be clear. If someone at the end of the call says, okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do some research on the fastest growing careers in high tech. I'm going to come back to you next week with a chart on them. In the meantime, you're going to research what are the biggest mistakes that people that adopt artificial intelligence certification. I'm making this up, right? And we're going to come to the call we've both made, and we're keeping a commitment. I will come with a visual on the top high-tech careers, and you're going to come with the top 7 mistakes that people make when they're implementing AI initiatives. That's lunacy, but you get the point. We're very clear. It's that kind of clarity. I think that's helpful. Making and keeping commitments, and there may be none. There may be, the commitment might be, I'd like you to think about what it is you admire so much in Carol or Carl. Well, what is it? You talked about Carl a lot of the call. You've talked about why you think his career is such a great model for yours. I'd like you to come back to next week with 4 or 5 precise examples of what it is you admire in this guy, Carl. specific examples, meetings, conversations, deliverables, career growth. Come back with some very specific so that I can understand why that's important. And you get the point, right? It's that kind of specificity. Nearly all, if not all, conflict in life comes from mismatched or unfulfilled expectations. Quickest way to violate the trust of a mentor is don't do what you said you were going to do. And we know the higher up you get in an organization, your most valuable asset is your time. Don't be late. And let the mentor decide if she or he wants to extend it another 5 minutes, or perhaps it's 7 mentoring sessions. Let the mentor decide if he or she is able to extend it at all. It's just kind of getting clear up front. Takes courage. It takes people moving outside of their comfort zone and sometimes discussing what are the undiscussables. It's another requirement, I think, of a mentor is to, in a genteel way, with both a balance of courage and diplomacy, to set some boundaries on what's going to happen here in a way that makes the mentee comfortable, but it's clear.
Scott, I think these are some amazing insights and really well said. I think we're all very lucky winners here today to have the benefit of your experience and, you know, to be able to hear all of these stories directly from you. I guess to loop this conversation back to your book as well, you know, you've had so many amazing conversations with great leaders through your podcast, through your book. I guess one question that I wanted to make sure that we have an opportunity to discuss today is, are there commonalities in what you have seen in what makes a highly effective leader in leading people to kind of the next level of success? I mean, I think there's the obvious ones, right? Like hard work, you know, in theory, being a good person, but are there surprises in what you've discovered through those conversations?
Yeah, certainly. I think having an abundance mentality, and you know, it's a tough time right now, right? I mean, we're on the tail end of this pandemic, and depending upon which news channel you watch most frequently, it's over or never was or is coming back big, right? So govern your news sources carefully. It's easy to be scarce with our power, scarce with our fame, scarce with our resources, scarce with our knowledge. It's easy to be scarce. But what I've recognized from these authors and the guests on the podcast and the people that I feature in the books is they almost without exception have an abundance mentality, which is different than perhaps being generous. Because you can be generous, you know, at the mosque or at the synagogue or your church. You can be generous at a bake sale. But having an abundance mindset permeates everything you do, that you believe there is enough credit, enough information, enough fame, enough budget, enough love, enough time. I think that's it, Sarah, is they have this an abundance mentality that they don't ask what's in it for them. I was on a call, maybe it was this call last week where I do a lot of these types of things where someone said, so what's in it for the mentor? And I said, well, if you have to ask that question, then you may have the wrong person, because most mentors come into this because they have an abundance mentality. They realize that their career happened because they were mentored by people that they may not have recognized, formally or informally, that their success did not happen just because they went to Wharton or Stanford or Harvard or Oxford, that their career was the result of abundant people that poured into them and invested them, had high courage conversations with them. And so I think that's the first thing is this idea of having an abundance mentality, recognizing that as humans, we have scarce tendencies. It happens, right? Toilet paper in the pandemic and things like that, right? We have scarcity to be human. And the other thing I said 4 or 5 times now which is I'm beating this drum hard, is vulnerability, is being able to say, you know what, everyone gather around. I want to teach you a moment of, let me tell you the time when I lost this 7-figure client deal because I wouldn't stop talking because I thought I knew what the client needed. And I pushed this solution on them and it backfired. And I was blindsided by the fact that they knew what my agenda was. Whatever that is as a leader being confident and humble enough to talk about what your own insecurities are, what you're not great at, what your fears are. I think most of us, as a matter of fact, live our life in fear. We don't usually fear failing. We fear having other people see us fail. And once you kind of get comfortable with being confident enough to have other people see you fail, the sky's the limit. I mean, here's a great example. I'll end with this. I know our time is tight. I'm going to move my camera here for a second. My first two books, I'm just kind of switching some books around. My first book was called Management Mess to Leadership Success, 30 Challenges to Become the Leader You Would Follow. And it did extraordinarily well. Sold like 15,000 copies when it came out. And my next book was Marketing Mess to Brand Success. This book sold 15,000 copies out of the gate. This book sold 47 copies out of the gate. Like, I couldn't find 47 people in the world to buy this book. It was a total flop. I actually think it's my best book I've ever written. It was a total flop. I went on to Instagram, YouTube. I went on to LinkedIn, to Facebook, and I did a big unveiling with my 3 sons. This book sold 15,000, drum roll, drum roll. And I announced to the world that it sold 47 copies, not 47,000, not 4,700, 47. And I think it got the most comments, likes of any post I've ever posted, because people expected me to brag. And it was this absolute confession. It's a total flop in front of my 3 sons. They actually held up the numbers: 0, 4, and 7, not 470, 047. And I think it endeared me to people because I was just being vulnerable and truthful, right? So I think in addition to abundance, Sarah, I think it's vulnerability. People learn from your mistakes. They don't learn from your successes.
I love that. Thank you, Scott.
My pleasure.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for the session, for your time. We are incredibly grateful. This was very insightful. And I know folks are buying the books and starting to read. Now you're going to have like 50 copies sold by the end of the day. So
That's gracious. I can
we're
retire.
definitely driving
That's
up
gracious.
the numbers here.
Regina, that's sweet of you. I'd love to have you connect to me on LinkedIn. You can go to my website, scottjeffreymiller.com. Actually, my career coaching course is there. It's called Ignite Your Genius. I'm writing a book by the same name for the publisher Wiley. It'll be out in 2023. So if you ever would like to preview my course, I'm happy to send you a digital guidebook, or even access to the videos if you ever want to watch them. I'm happy to waive the fee. Just connect to me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to send you the guidebook digitally or the courses. If it ever would be interest to your company, I'm happy to talk to you about that.
We love that. Thank you so much, Scott. And you've been
Thanks,
so
everybody.
generous with your time. And
Thank
I
you.
can speak for
Stay
all of us
safe
to
and
say that we
keep
love
checking on
getting to
Anna.
know you.
Keep checking on Anna. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Enjoy your
Thanks,
conversation
everyone.
with Ray
Thank you.
Gallo.
Scott,
Bye.
thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Have a great week.